Hi guys, I want to talk about how I would set up Cypress configuration in a way that scales so that you can start up your tests as fast as possible and you can switch between them quite fastly. So that will save time in CI and local development. So the first thing is commands versus e2e file versus component file. So I forget which version, but in one of the recent versions, when you open Cypress, you have to have these three files, no matter what. So you have to have a command TS file, an e2e.ts file, and a component TS file. If you don't have these, they will get auto-created when you do Cypress open, right? So given that, how do these three things work together? It's not really explained anywhere, and I don't really understand why, but here is how. So this commands file, right? Here you put everything that is common to everywhere, both end-to-end and my wife is being funny. So both end-to-end and component, you would put in the command file. So I would put here things, plugins, let's say, that are everywhere. For instance, Cypress grep, I think it could be used with component test. So I'm thinking that would be for both end-to-end and component. The Cypress selectors, they would be universal everywhere. So they would go in command TS. All right, and then you have the end-to-end file. In the end-to-end file, we import the command file. So everything in here will be available to the end-to-end test. Similar in the component.ts file, all the commands are important, so they are all available in the component test. Now the question comes up, well, where do I put my new commands and stuff? The way I would do that is I would just make a new file here. Like I would not litter this if it's not common to both component and end-to-end test, so it's kind of unique. Maybe a new file or a folder, however you want it, right? However you want it, just organize it to your heart's content. And then what I would do with that, so this would be kind of a commands file, right? What I would do with that is I would just go to the spec of concern, right? I would import that one over there. So I would say import all these commands from, so where are we? So we are support, however. So this import these group of commands from this file, and those would be available right over here. The reason I would make it very granular like that is completely to do with startup time. And I will show you why that is, or how that impacts you badly at scale. Because I've seen projects where starting the warm-up time, where the text that says your tests are loading is 20 seconds. That's unacceptable. That's just too much time in CI and local development, right? So that you don't run into that, let's just show one example. So let's say right now, okay, we'll just sort of side by side. We have a copy of the same spec, all right? And what we'll do is we'll just switch between these files. All right, so we'll click that. So this is instant, right? So imagine this switch taking 20 seconds, right? Each time you click something, in order for this test start running, is 20 seconds. How does that happen? It happens when you have so many plugins and so many command files. So let's say in the e2e file, right? Let's say we have testing library. It's a popular Cypress plugin, right? So let's say we just enable that into e2e file. So that means before any end-to-end test loads, all the commands over here will load, right? So now let's look at it. We'll be able to see your tests are loading right over here. Now we can see it. It's for a brief second, but I can definitely see your tests are loading. And when we remove that, we don't see it, right? It's instant. I can't see it this way. So the point is, import them where you need them, import them in the spec files versus dumping everything in the command e2e or component. If it's in the command, it's worse because it's also going to slow down component tests. If it's in e2e, it will slow all the e2e tests. And so what you want to do is you want to do this at the spec file that you're importing. Let's say if I'm using testing library commands, in this spec, I would just import it right there, right? That way, not everything has to be slow, right? Because at scale, what happens is you have about 20 of these and so many commands, and it just takes so much time to start. So that's number one optimization, the way I would use e2e component and commands files, right? So now that's covered, let's talk about plugins and tasks. Now, plugins and tasks. Every plugin has these instructions on how to use these plugins and whatnot, but it's confusing. I mean, at scale, when you have so many plugins, that becomes a mess of its own. So how do you make it nice and tidy, and you don't have to think about it when you're using it? So let's just look at our Cypress config file. So what if this config file, right, these tasks and plugins could always stay like this and you never have to change it? All you have to do is import the plugins from support plugins, import tasks from support tasks. You would just call tasks under your setup node events. And if you are using these tasks in your component test, that's perfectly fine. I mean, I don't think it's going to be the same exact tasks and plugins, but if so, then you would just move this function out and then not have to repeat that code. But honestly, this isn't going to repeat any more than that, right? So you just call tasks, you just return the plugins, right? And that's all you do. And this config file stays the same. How does that happen? Well, we just have a default function for plugins, right? We just import them here in this file. And then as we have more plugins, we just keep adding them right here, right? If we have data session, we would just require that or import it here. Some of them you can't import because they don't have types, so don't try to fight it. Just require it, that's fine. Right? And then all you do is just add new plugins right here. It's that simple. You don't even have to think about it. Just require and then bam, just add here and then it works wherever it needs to work. For tasks, right? So they're kind of like, and then what happens to plugins? Of course, it gets imported here in the config file and then called here, and then boom, it works out of the box. So all you have to do is just add here and then add to the return, because it has to return an object at the end. And let's look at the tasks. So let's say we have a very simple one, but in essence, tasks, they all work the same way, right? So I would segregate them as much as I could in default functions like this. So that's super tidy, right? And let's see, import log from log. Okay, yeah, so we have a log function here, right? So all it does is a default function which will enable to log to the CLI when we log something with a side task, right? So we import that here, and then we have a file for tasks, and this is the first one. It is an object, right? It has to be wrapped in an object, so that's why it's that. But if you have more tasks, you just add them here. So import another something from somewhere else, right? And then here you would just on task, like your new whatever super awesome task that just, your task goes here. And then you would just import that right here, right? So all you have to do is, as you have new tasks, you add the new code and then just add it to the task file. And at the config file, you don't have to do anything. Right, so this is how I would set everything up. Now, I'm wrestling the CI, but I will most certainly put the PR in there, and it's going to be called chore refine task plugins. So you'll be able to see these exact changes if you want to see the PR, but probably you don't want to see the PR. They will be in the React Cypress TS template and the Vite template, and from there you can just look at it and replicate it.